Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. This week, I'm going to take a look at Afghanistan because just a few days ago, we marked 100 days since August the 15th, when the Taliban took over in Kabul and the last US and NATO forces left the country. Now, during this period, the US and the NATO allies have been busy with their lessons learned exercise. The US Congress has held hearings and basically grilled senior Pentagon officials and State Department officials about the chaotic conditions of the withdrawal from Kabul in August. NATO has been looking more long-term at what went wrong and why the international effort did not bear more fruit. Lack of strategic planning, lack of integration between the military and the civilian effort, not putting enough pressure on the Afghan government to deal with corruption. The fact that the Afghan National Army was trained along Western lines with Western technology, and as long as that technology was available, they did well. But when it was taken away, well, we know what happened to them, of course. So these lessons are important, particularly if NATO embarks on similar operations in the future. But that's not really what is urgent at the moment. The situation in Afghanistan is dire. The Taliban clearly are having problems converting from an insurgency to a government. Human Rights Watch reported this week that 100 senior officials from the military and from the public administration in the old regime have been assassinated, notwithstanding that the Taliban say that they've given a general amnesty. So either they're not telling the truth or they can't really control their local commanders. They are sending contradictory signals, for example, about women being allowed to go back to their jobs or girls being able to go back to school. They promise to end the violence, but clearly this isn't happening with ISIS, the terrorist organization, carrying out a number of attacks, including a major explosion outside the mosque in Mazar el-Sharif just a few days ago. And the exodus of people continues. Every day, 5,000 people queue up at the Torkham crossing point between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we see from TV interviews that these are doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, teachers, academics, engineers, all saying that they haven't been paid for months. And these are the lifeblood of any viable future Afghan economy and society. The economy remains blocked as well as international organizations and governments put stringent conditions on the Taliban before they will release wealth funds or before they will resume credit and normal trading links. And don't forget that 80% of the budget of the Afghan government before the collapse in August was paid for by the international community. So we need to deal with these urgent situations now. The first one, of course, is the humanitarian crisis, where David Beasley, the head of the World Food Programme, was in Afghanistan just 3 weeks ago and reported that 23 million people, half of the population, are on the verge of starvation, including 14 million children, according to Save the Children. And the number of people in hunger has gone up by 35% over the last year. The winter is going to be tough for a large number of Afghans. And this means that the international community clearly has got to get aid in quickly. It was encouraging this week that the United States and the UN brokered a deal whereby the World Bank can now release $500 million of emergency humanitarian aid. It's going to be important that the Afghan government give a total guarantee that they will not interfere with this distribution of aid, that it can go directly, bypassing Kabul, to the UN agencies and to the NGOs. We need to avoid a situation like we've seen in Ethiopia over the last few months, where aid has been blocked or exploited for political purposes between the Tigrayans and the Ethiopian government. Secondly, we need to urgently deal with the situation of the economy. And this means resuming the opening of airports and roads and basic infrastructure. This week, the EU, again meeting the Taliban in Doha, has shown an interest in helping to reopen airports, but on the proviso that aid is distributed without interference. The security situation needs to be looked at urgently as well. If the Taliban really are serious about cracking down on ISIS, but also Al-Qaeda, which is more difficult for them given their past association, then it may be worthwhile for the international community to try to help the Taliban to do that, particularly through the sharing of intelligence. The Taliban need to cooperate more with Russia and the Central Asian countries as well, and they would send a good signal of their seriousness by getting out of the government the 3 members of the Haqqani clan, notoriously associated with terrorism, that are currently serving as ministers. On education, the Taliban promised that girls and women will be allowed back, but it never seems to happen. And this week, the United States has suggested to the Taliban that a system of monitoring and benchmarking be established to make sure that that is really happening. On health, the COVID has not spared the Afghan population any more than any of us, particularly in the developing countries. So urgent distribution of vaccines, provision of doctors and health workers, the ability to evacuate out of the country people requiring urgent medical attention, improvement to the hospital system. All of this are things where the international community can help. Finally, regional cooperation. This week, the Economic Cooperation Organization, largely sponsored by Pakistan, held a meeting in Turkmenistan on regional cooperation. They discussed removing trade barriers, developing a gas pipeline and other transportation corridors, railways and power grids, all of the things that Afghanistan needs for its development, but which would also promote regional integration and more transport and communication links between Asia and Europe, using Afghanistan as a valuable transit country. It's very important that the Afghans participate in these regional frameworks. They have the added advantage that it will also reduce the dependency of the Taliban on one single external actor, as was the case with Pakistan in the past. So in conclusion, the Taliban are reality, providing they don't do anything silly like sponsor terrorism. They're likely to be there for some time to come. We need to deal with them. Secondly, we have a responsibility to the Afghan people, given the 20 years of investment that we made in the country and our promise not to abandon them. Thirdly, the Taliban clearly are a movement with many internal divisions, particularly between the realists and the fundamentalists. We need to see what we can do to help the realists who seek cooperation and want to live in the 21st century rather than in the Middle Ages to prevail. And finally, the collapse of Afghanistan is in nobody's interest, because it would only make another failed state serve as a haven for the terrorist organizations that we most fear. So there is a good reason to learn the lessons of the last 20 years, but it's even more urgent to make sure that we don't repeat them in the next 20 years in Afghanistan. Thank you for watching and listening today. And again, look forward to engaging next week.